Every day that passes at this point in the week, we are getting more and more valuable information. And this is going to help us make week 1 fantasy football decisions. So we've already gone over the top 30 running backs, the top 30 wide receivers in fantasy football for week 1. So today we need to get into the top 12 quarterback rankings for week 1 fantasy football. So we're going to go ahead and start out here with our clear number 1 guy in the number 1 tier. It's Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Detroit Lions tomorrow night at home in Kansas City. The first tier of guys here is fantastic. You cannot go wrong with any of these guys in the first tier here. But to me, there is a very clear answer on who the number 1 guy is in the number 1 tier, and it's Patrick Mahomes. This guy is so easy to me right now to rank at number 1 for so many reasons right now. This is a situation where he's not only likely going to be the quarterback 1 in fantasy football by the time the year ends, but this particular week is such a fantastic matchup. This has the highest over-under of the week in the NFL this week. This is going to be an unbelievable matchup right here. Detroit was ranked in number 30 defense as far as passing yards allowed last year. Now, I think they're going to improve on that number this year. I actually discussed on how I believe they're going to be a top 12 fantasy defense this year because I believe they're going to improve in so many fronts this year. But Kansas City, as I've discussed in the past, is really one of the only offenses that is truly immune to defense right here. So even if Detroit really does improve as the season goes, it's not going to affect Kansas City, and it's specifically not going to affect Patrick Mahomes in week 1. Now moving on to number 2, this is a clear number 2 to me as well. I love this matchup for Justin Herbert taking on the Miami Dolphins in week 1. This is the second best matchup of the week. I've discussed this one as well. This has the second highest over-under of the week in the NFL. This is going to be an absolute shootout. And Miami's defense had a weakness as far as defending the passing goes. They were number 27 in passing yards allowed in 2022. Now, obviously, the situation long-term is going to change once they can get Jalen Ramsey back. But Jalen Ramsey is not there. So this defense, specifically the secondary, is probably going to look very similar to what it did last year. They're probably going to struggle a little bit in this particular portion of the season. So I do think that this is a fantastic matchup that Justin Herbert will take advantage of. The weapons he has are all healthy. Keenan Allen's healthy, Mike Williams healthy, Austin Eckler healthy, and also with the addition of Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator, I simply love this situation for Justin Herbert that he has himself in this year. I mean, this particular matchup in particular, I think it's good to expect Justin Herbert to throw at least 40-plus passes in week 1. So moving on to number 3, I've got Josh Allen taking on the New York Jets in New York on Monday night, man. So Allen had a little bit of a down year in 2022. When you look at it from a closer eye, he had some stinker games. He had more turnovers last year, and he was just more inconsistent without Brian Daboll, and that's concerned a lot of people, including myself a little bit. But what is important to note here with Josh Allen specifically is that Josh Allen did have an injury last year that he dealt with for the majority of the back half of the season. And it wasn't just any injury. This was an injury that was to his throwing shoulder that he dealt with for the majority of the back half of the season. That's a problem here, and that could help explain why Josh Allen had some stinker games, especially towards the back half of the season. So obviously what to love here is that Josh Allen is coming into the season healthy. He's got no lingering issues to that elbow as far as we know right now. This is a primetime game in week 1, so I expect Josh Allen to come out swinging in this game. In a primetime game, coming off a disappointing end to the season last year. The defense is a little bit of a concern here going up against that really stout Jets defense that I think is going to be fantastic this year, but I still expect Josh Allen to light it up in week 1. Now moving down to our next tier here. This tier is a really great tier as well. Just have a couple more questions with this particular tier than I do with tier 1. And to kick it off in this tier, it is Justin Fields at number 4 taking on the Green Bay Packers at home. So this to me is honestly one of the most fascinating matchups of the week. The Chicago Bears Green Bay matchup, I've discussed it in several videos this week already. How interesting I think this particular matchup is going to be, just because of all the changes to both teams. And specifically with Chicago, they've got Justin Fields, a true number 1 wide receiver now. That's going to help him so much. And the fact that they do have an improving offensive line as well is absolutely going to improve. In all offseason, we've heard nothing but positives regarding Justin Fields about how he's just looking like a totally different player this year, especially being comfortable in the pocket. I think Justin Fields is going to get off to a hot start at home, but this is a pretty tough matchup. Green Bay is not an easy out. They were number 6 in passing yards allowed last year. So they're not an easy out for anybody, and especially in a division game where things are always dicey here. But Fields, like I said, huge upgrade at number 1 wide receiver. It's a clear upgrade. It's going to open up a lot for guys like Darnell Mooney and guys like Cole Kmet. It's going to help everybody out because DJ Moore is a clear dominant number 1 wide receiver. So I expect Fields to break off some big plays in this week. And he's also, I do think he's going to throw for more yards in 2023 as a whole, starting in week 1. So number 5 here, I've got Lamar Jackson taking on the Houston Texans at home. This is a pretty easy pick, just specifically for the matchup right here. All offseason, we've been hearing about how this team is going to let Lamar Jackson rip this offseason. They're going to let him rip in 2023 because they believe that he was being held back by previous offensive coordinator Greg Roman. We'll see how that goes long term. What I will say about this in this week is I don't think this is going to be the week that we see Lamar Jackson really get unleashed as a thrower. I mean, this is such an easy matchup for them. I expect them to absolutely curb stomp Houston this week. So I don't think that they're just going to need to do that type of behavior this week as far as the passing volume goes. I think Lamar Jackson will be really efficient this week. I think he'll hit on a couple big plays with his legs and with his arm. But I think by halftime, this team is going to switch to a run-first game script, just because they'll be pounding the Houston Texans at that point. So at number 6, I've got Jalen Hurts taking on the New England Patriots in New England. Like I've discussed all week in videos, I think this is going to be a tough matchup this week for the Philadelphia Eagles. Coming off a Super Bowl hangover, week 1 in New England against a really tough defense, I do think it's going to be tough. And specifically, New England's pass rush is very, very tough. So I don't think this is going to be an easy out for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. But what I will say is that they have the best offensive line going into 2023. So that is absolutely going to help their cause, especially when they're going up against a team that specifically has a great pass rush. Remember, he's still at the number 6 quarterback, so he still has a very high ceiling this week. I'm just saying, based on his standards, I don't know if it's going to be his best game. I don't think it's going to be his best game. Of course, he's going to make the big plays and enough big plays for them to win this ball game. He might get a rushing touchdown or two, but I definitely do think this will be a lower scoring game as a whole and probably not Jalen Hurts' best week of the 2023 season as far as fantasy football goes. Now moving down to our next tier, we've got Tua Tagovailoa at number 7 here, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles. This is a very high upside tier right here. You've got a lot of good quarterback matchups with plenty of upside. Tua versus Herbert, this is a fantastic matchup like we've been talking about all week. This is going to be a complete shootout right here. Now, Los Angeles' defense is tough against the pass. They were number 7 in total passing yards allowed in 2022, so they're not exactly an easy out for any quarterback or any wide receiver in particular. But this is simply just a situation where Miami just has too many weapons for them not to score a ton of points in this game. Their offense is so explosive, and Tua Tagovailoa is a pretty decent quarterback when he's healthy. Good news is he's coming into the season fully healthy. Like I said, I'm expecting this to be a total shootout, and you want every piece of this matchup on your fantasy roster in your starting lineup in week 1. So moving on to number 8, I've got Joe Burrow taking on the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland this week. So the good news is, and really I was expecting this to happen, Joe Burrow is going to start in week 1. That is the news we're hearing out of Cincinnati at this particular point in time. Now what I will say is that Joe Burrow does have a history of starting out slow by his standards in week 1. When you look back to last year, he had 18 fantasy points in week 1 last year. 2021, he had 20 fantasy points in week 1. Now, obviously, those are still great weeks. Like, those are still good quarterback weeks. They're just not up to his standards. I mean, when he's scoring 40-point games by week 8, week 10, week 13, it's obviously, looking back, not going to be that great. But those are still good weeks. And Cleveland will be a tough out as a divisional matchup this week. And they were the number 5 defense in passing yards allowed last year. So I'm expecting Joe Burrow to be good, but I'm not expecting him to be at his best form as of yet. Now moving down to number 9, I've got Jared Goff taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in that beautiful Thursday night game that is happening tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. I cannot wait. I mentioned him in my waiver wire video yesterday, actually. It was surprising to me that he was under 50% rostered in ESPN leagues. Long story short, if he's on your waiver wire, He should not be. You absolutely need to scoop him up. This matchup is simply fantastic this week. Kansas City's defense is going to struggle because they are likely going to be without Chris Jones in week 1. So this is a situation that I think Jared Goff and company is going to take advantage of. They've got Jahmyr Gibbs now on this offense. He's going to get targets. Amon-Ra's going to hog targets in week 1. Even Sam Laporta might get involved at that tight end position. I expect absolute fireworks in this particular matchup here. Now moving on to number 10 in the next tier, I've got Aaron Rodgers taking on the Buffalo Bills this week. So if you've been watching this channel, you probably know that I have been buying in on the New York Jets hype this offseason. I think Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson are going to light it up this year. And also, in addition to that, from an Aaron Rodgers and an offensive perspective, I think that Allen Lazard is probably the perfect number 2 option here for Aaron Rodgers. He's got the relationship with him. He likes him. I do think it's a good number 2 option. But obviously, Garrett Wilson is the wide receiver 1 here. But the number 1 thing that does concern me about this whole team is their offensive line. That is my main concern about the entire New York Jets team. But the good news this week is that Buffalo is going to be without Von Miller. This is going to make it a lot easier for Aaron Rodgers to have success this week. I do think that the offensive line will be able to hold up in this particular week without Von Miller. So I do think that the Jets actually do match up really well here against the Buffalo Bills without Von Miller. I think Aaron Rodgers has a good night on Monday night. It's a primetime game. There's going to be a lot of excitement in New York. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to feed off of it and feed a lot of his great options. So moving on to number 11, I've got Trevor Lawrence taking on the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. I love Trevor Lawrence, but there's a couple layers to this right here. Number 1, it's an easy matchup. Indianapolis is going to get absolutely trounced by Jacksonville this week. And I think it's going to happen very, very early. So that's really the main problem. So when you look back to like what we were discussing with Lamar Jackson against the Houston Texans, I think this could be a very similar week for him. I think Trevor Lawrence might have the same similar issues as far as fantasy football goes in this particular week. I think he's going to make a couple big throws. I think he's going to be very efficient. It's going to be easy peasy, and then they won't need to throw him that much in the second half of this game. Now, at number 12, I've got Kirk Cousins taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Minnesota this week. Again, similar situation to Trevor Lawrence. This matchup is pretty easy. Tampa Bay is not going to be scoring points this year. Their offense is going to absolutely putter this year. So I think Minnesota is going to beat Tampa Bay pretty easily this week. And it's probably going to be very early that Minnesota gets up. So I just don't think that this is going to be a very pass-heavy game script. I think they'll get out to this early lead. Kirk Cousins will have a few big throws, maybe a touchdown or 2. And I think by that time, this is going to become a run-heavy game script by the second half. So let me know what you think of the quarterback rankings this week and what matchup you're struggling with in Week 1 fantasy football. And if you want to see who you need to add off of your waiver wire before Week 1, click on this video right here.